Good morning, Wabash.
Good morning.
Today, speaking in Pioneer Chapel is Dr. Sara Drury with her talk entitled Speech, Silence, and Synthesis. Dr. Sara A. Drury begins her 8th year at Wabash College this fall as she returns from a year as a visiting research fellow at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. She received her BA from Boston College and was awarded Phi Beta Kappa honors, and then her MA and PhD from the Pennsylvania State University. Her research looks at the rhetoric of deliberative democracy and considers how we might use communication to develop new, collaborative ways of addressing public issues to improve communities, small and large. She also studies and teaches about contemporary political rhetoric and religious rhetoric. Most recently, she has published on public deliberation in Health and Science, presidential debates, and this past year served as editor for a special issue of the journal Communication Quarterly, focusing on the rhetoric of the 2016 presidential election. Dr. Drury received the 2016 Central States Communication Association's Outstanding New Teacher Award and was named to Nerd Scholar's inaugural class of 40 under 40 professors. Dr. Drury wishes to express her sincere thanks to the Sphinx Club for the opportunity to speak to our community after her return from her sabbatical abroad. Please welcome Dr. Sara Drury.
Good morning, Wabash. Good morning, Dr. Drury. Before I start, how about a round of applause for the organ music? That was really nice today. It is truly a welcome back gift and an honor for me to be asked by Keith Owen and the Sphinx Club to give this chapel talk. Thank you. It's still early enough that I can say, welcome to Wabash to the freshmen, and since I was gone last year, I offer my greetings to the sophomore class, last year's freshmen, and hope that you had a good first year. And to juniors and seniors, and to my colleagues sitting in the back, it is good to see you again, to work with you, and to learn alongside you. I like to talk. Yeah, just ask my students. I really like to talk. Just ask my colleagues, because many of them know that I might be the only person on campus who enjoys meetings. I have always liked to talk. I was in speech and debate and mock trial. I competed in public speaking contests, including one focusing on Theodore Roosevelt and civic leadership. And I also took part in theatrical productions. You could even say that my love of talk, of debate, led me to discover a different type of love, since my husband, Professor Jeff Drury, and I met at an argumentation conference. Yeah, that's a real thing. My appreciation of speech goes even further. You see, my parents, Joe and Kathy Meltretter, are here in the back of the chapel because they've made their annual pilgrimage to Wabash College. It's gonna get better, hold on. They've made their annual pilgrimage to Wabash College to cheer on the Little Giants this coming Saturday. So my parents met through an argument-based activity, namely a high school speech and debate tournament. And my grandparents, George and Dorothy Kazmarek, who are also here, certainly love talk. They are an incredible example of how to communicate, how to share ideas, how to argue, and how to make up. In other words, they've talked their way through 65 years of marriage to be sitting here today. Yes, I have a passion for speech. It's the heart of the work I do. I'm a professor of rhetoric, and I work with students in Wabash Democracy and Public Discourse to engage communities on campus and across the Midwestern United States on how to create productive talk that develops new ways to address problems. In our work, the freedom of speech, the right of every single person here in the United States to express their ideas, to argue their point, and to be argued with by others is foundational to how we approach community dialogues and deliberations. But you'll notice that the title of my chapel talk isn't just about speech, but rather speech, silence, and synthesis. Gentlemen, I believe that these three ideas represent principles necessary for a robust and successful Wabash education. And whether you are a freshman who's just about completed 2 full weeks of college classes, or a sophomore who's beginning to decide your fields of study, or a junior who's balancing rapidly intensifying courses in your major alongside some remaining distribution requirements, or a senior who's enjoying the rigors of seminar and thinking about what comes next. Okay, or not thinking about what comes next. Gentlemen, speech, silence, and synthesis will enrich your liberal arts experience and career beyond Wabash. I'll begin by discussing how free speech and the marketplace of ideas is essential for liberal arts inquiry. Second, I'll share my growing appreciation for intentional but active silence. And finally, I'll talk about how synthesis represents the work we do together at Wabash College as a liberal arts community devoted to thinking critically, acting responsibly, leading effectively, and living humanely, as a community working to be engaged citizens. While speech has always been important to me, the last 7 years at Wabash have stressed that open expression is critical to a thriving liberal arts community. Now, the right of every citizen to free speech is enshrined in the First Amendment of the Constitution. You may not know this, but James Madison's proposed text for the First Amendment was actually a bit more flowery. His proposal was, "The people shall not be deprived or abridged of their right to speak, to write, or to publish their sentiments, and the freedom of the press, as one of the great bulwarks of liberty, shall be inviolable." So the US Congress acted as editor, the very first one, and we now have the shortened clause of "Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of expression" as a portion of the now First Amendment. Though that edited formation may serve us well legally, I find it a little unfortunate that the sentence shifted from "the people shall not be deprived" to "Congress shall not abridge." An emphasis on the people having the right to free speech reminds us who is empowered in democracies. While this right was historically restricted to white landowning men, today, each one of us, created equal, has the right to speak. Now, the judicial system has refined what practically this right to free speech means over the last 2.5 centuries. And rather than cover that history today, if you're interested in free speech, I encourage you to check out the next meeting of WDPD's Free Speech Reading Group, which met yesterday and will meet again over lunch on September 26th. This notion of the people, citizens, having the right to speak, write, and publish their ideas to promote the free and open exchange of thought is critical for students who study the liberal arts to learn to be leaders of their generation. To ground this claim, I want to turn to the words of W. Norwood Brigance, professor of speech, what we now call rhetoric, at Wabash College during the first half of the 20th century. Brigance published several landmark studies of great US speeches, as well as several textbooks. He even served as president of the Speech Association of America. He was, and kind of is, a big deal. In the introduction to his textbook, Speech, Its Disciplines and Techniques in a Free Society, Brigance explained his perspective about the importance of speech to college students, to our communities, and to our country. Why speak? He asked, and then answered, to keep a society free, to settle differences by talk instead of by force, to alter and promote thought, to water and cultivate ideas, hopes, sentiments, and enthusiasms in a way and to a degree that cannot be done while we are separate from one another. When I look at the rows before me and above me, gentlemen, I see men who are committed to expression for these purposes. Your speech at Wabash and beyond encourages you to become the ethical, engaged leaders that we need in this world. The free and open exchange of ideas is a key part of our Wabash experience. Discussion is the norm in our classes. But I ask you, gentlemen, are you taking advantage of that discussion space, of free speech? Are you being a gentleman of free speech at all times on campus and in your communities? Upholding the principle of free speech means not just making an argument and not just providing information that you think is right. It means embracing a full notion of open discussion, one that allows you multiple pathways. Here's a few ways that you might think about a discussion, whether in class or with your friends. You can be part of what Brigance called the cultivation of ideas process. If a reading or one of your peers puts forth an idea, think about how you could strengthen that idea with further argument. Or you might challenge the idea, offering a condition or evidence that alters some part of the premise, the way a gardener might prune away one part of a plant so that another part grows. The challenge here is not to just want to defeat the idea and win, but rather to grow something stronger together. There are times, of course, that you want or need to engage in advocacy, of trying to persuade others to your view. And when those times come, your training as a Wabash College liberal arts student encourages you, entrusts you, to treat speech as a right and a responsibility. It is your right to have an opinion and say it. However, to be a gentleman and responsible citizen, you also need to think about how to engage those who might disagree with you and how to do so in a productive and civil manner. Altering thought, to once again use Brigance's phrase, is done best when one understands the other side, not when one is just seeking to override it, shout it down, or defeat it. So you see, my passion for speech and the need for free speech is conditioned by embracing the rights and responsibilities of speech. And that responsibility of understanding other perspectives comes to my second theme for today, silence. Now, some noises are loud enough that they cut through our everyday cacophony. For example, the booming tones of a well-won Monon bell echoing through the campus on a cold November morning. Thanks for that, gentlemen. But the work of socio-political discussion, for that work, silence has to be a part of your exchange in ideas. When I think of our voices echoing loud and long, I don't just think about the tradition of singing the school song every Thursday in this building. I think of the ideas and perspectives that are shared around campus, in a classroom, a lunch table in Sparks or a fraternity, or when I see students sharing their ideas while working in internships and volunteering with community organizations. I think of how student after student at Wabash has enhanced my understanding of particular issues because I was silent and listened to their advocacy, their speech. So silence is about pausing from speech to listen, to consider, and to reflect. It is not about being passive or still. Instead, I suggest that in the context of free speech and the exchange of ideas, silence is an active, it is an intentional choice, allowing time for a process of consideration of others' views and how they might shift your own understanding. This week, in my Rhetoric 101 class, Public Speaking, my class and I discussed the ethics of listening. Now, normally, most semesters, this discussion takes on a very predictable format. When asked about the ethics of listening, students offer examples about not having your cell phone on or not falling asleep during their peers' speeches. The latter is a particular danger since I teach public speaking during what I like to call the 8 a.m. is for champions hour of the day. But this week, my students and I reflected on the need for quiet to engage with the world around us. We are constantly bombarded by speech. And remember, I love speech, but we need silence to process those messages and think about them in a critical way, evaluating arguments and the relevance and reliability of evidence. We need to pause our judgment, temporarily put on hold the part of our brain that likes to race forward to a conclusion. Doing so will enable us to better understand a fuller range of arguments and perspectives. Nowhere is this more relevant than in today's political climate. One of my public speaking students pointed out in our discussion that even new and dynamic forms of communication like podcasts or YouTube channels largely exist to pull us away from one another and towards our own beliefs. In other words, we begin to listen or watch these channels because we already know, or at least we suspect, the judgment. We anticipate the view being advocated, and we get a sense of the conclusion. We're seeking to enhance our own opinions. Instead, we need times of silence where we pause judgment and take time to reflect on other ideas. Pausing our preconceived notions of what it means to be a Democrat, or what it means to be a Republican, or what it means to be an independent, to pause our notions of what that sort of person who holds this belief, that position believes. This is not a passive silence. Trust me, try it. Instead, I am suggesting that as much as each of us embraces speech, we also embrace occasional stops of speech to promote the activities, the ideas of those around us. This silence encourages us to intentionally create space for others to speak. And when we do so, it is our responsibility to listen with them, trying to understand their view, rather than listening merely to oppose and challenge them. Now at Wabash, this is a fairly easy task. This campus, this community is incredible at taking turns and making space for different ideas. One of the greatest privileges of my role as director of WDPD is that there are times when we'll have a student project about a public issue, and the student team actually holds different positions on that topic. But yet they are all committed to creating an impartial community deliberation where other citizens can speak their views, evaluate different ideas, and come to new understandings. But how often do we all do this outside of our own community, where we trust one another? Do we challenge ourselves to listen to other views, to be silent while others, even those we disagree with, speak? I want to caution that I'm not advocating silence is always the response to others' speech. The response to bad speech, offensive speech, can and should be more speech of the productive, inclusive, and problem-solving sort. The well-respected Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis argued in his influential opinion, Whitney v. California, that when confronted with troubling or offensive speech, the solution was to counter that with good critical speech. He argued, if there be time to expose through discussion the falsehoods and fallacies, to avert the evil by processes of education, the remedy is more speech, not enforced silence. Now, Brandeis was writing in regards to the law protecting our right to speech, but I suggest that we can uphold that right while it's still, at times, electing to find our own balance between speech and silence, between advocacy and listening to those who may have a different experience. The ancient Greek Isocrates wrote about how citizen leaders could develop phronesis, or practical wisdom, the sort of learned wisdom created through the process of exchanging reasoning on issues, making a speech and critiquing others, on a balance of speaking and silence, of responding and reflecting, and then, only once that process has occurred, determining the best way forward. It is through this balance of speech and silence that we come to the third theme of my chapel talk, synthesis. Now, synthesis is dangerously close to a do-all buzzword, I get it, but let me explain what I mean by synthesis and why it complements our liberal arts practices. The various meanings of synthesis center around coming together and change. Many definitions are detailed in the Oxford English Dictionary, which I used our library's digital access to in reference for this chapel talk. A wonderful resource that I highly recommend if you need to check out where a word comes from. Generally speaking, synthesis is the putting together of different parts to make a complex and new whole. In other words, when you synthesize, you bring together ideas and critiques, the new and the old, to make a new conclusion. In your time at Wabash, you will be asked to take courses commonly referred to as distribution requirements. Now, I prefer to think of them as opportunities to distribute your liberal arts inquiry, but I understand why a shortened title is preferred. Wabash provides incredible opportunities to learn alongside faculty and students in interesting, unique, and current topics of study. Too often, students will rush through these courses rather than carefully looking through descriptions to try and figure out what course might complement or challenge their major field of study. While practicing this speech, because yes, I practiced my speech with a rhetoric department speech tutor, Sawyer Donovan, since we all can use pointers for improvement, Sawyer shared with me that his distribution courses have been some of the best moments of synthesis during his Wabash career. So underclassmen, I encourage you to ask a senior what course outside their major impacted them, and you'll likely learn why it's worthwhile to make these decisions with care. And seniors, if you don't have a liberal arts synthesis moment, I advise you to begin seeking one and reflecting on it before oral comprehensive exams this January. Yeah, pro tip. It's one of my favorite questions. In addition to a breadth of courses for distributing your liberal arts inquiry, you are also required to take courses in a major or minor. Think of all of these courses as an opportunity for speech and for silence, and then synthesis. Speak your newfound position, supported with evidence you find in the lab, or in the text, or in the world, and encourage others to speak and be silent. Ask them for critiques, to challenge your position and alert you to flaws, and then go back and together revise your thinking with greater awareness. At the same time, think about when you can observe, listen to others, and learn. Sometimes you can learn as much from listening, taking notes, and reflecting, and then moving into offering questions or a new idea through synthesis. As you engage in these acts of speech and silence and in liberal arts inquiry, building towards a new base of understanding, think about how you can bring ideas together, to combine, to challenge frameworks, to weigh possibilities from different perspectives. This might be done in an obvious way. You might combine a rhetoric major with a chemistry minor, or a psychology major with an English minor. Or it might be committing yourself to challenge this very semester, could be this afternoon, to think about how your distribution class in history or modern language or math or whatever discipline that you're experiencing for the first time connects with or offers a different perspective to learn from with your major fields of study. During the last few years, my research has focused on how to accomplish synthesis through communication design and facilitation in deliberative rhetoric. It's not always easy because sometimes different things are important to different groups of people. Synthesis can be about finding unlikely common ground, like in one community conversation where two factions disagreed on taxes, government organization, land use, really just about everything. But then both agreed that new educational opportunities for the young people in our community could be organized to help this community improve for the future. They found something that they could agree on, even small. Sometimes it's hard to find that common ground, and I admit that. Deliberation is not all about consensus. And when we do not have common ground, when there are tough choices to be made, this is especially when we need your kind of liberal arts synthesis as leaders. Synthesis helps us with the difficult work of sorting through competing perspectives and accepting that in some situations, one group may not have their ideas or concerns prioritized. They give something up for the public good. Synthesis may help different parties to acknowledge an urgent need among one group that takes precedent, or see how someone's arguments maybe don't appeal to as broad of an audience as they thought. Our contemporary political system might call this defeat or a loss. But I prefer the perspective taken by political theorist and philosopher Danielle Allen, who calls this the sacrifice necessary to sustain our democracy. In her writings about sacrifice and citizenship, Allen explains that an honest account of collective democratic action must begin with the acknowledgement that communal decisions inevitably benefit some citizens at the expense of others, even when the whole community generally benefits. But as Allen traces in her book, Talking to Strangers, sacrifice has all too often come from the same groups of people in our society. And so she urges us, and I sign on to this, to find new pathways through rhetoric, speech, and listening, silence, to develop a connected form of political friendship amongst ideological friends and strangers, honoring the sacrifices made in order to create a better future. As you may realize, this practice of synthesis is fast becoming a tangled web. I know it too. Trying to make decisions when some people sacrifice while acknowledging past sacrifices as a contextual factor and then thinking about different evidence and different values, well, it gets complicated. But while I don't think synthesis gives us easy answers, practicing synthesis every day in the opportunities presented to us gets us into the conversation rather than prompts us to retreat to our own ideas or preferences. And when we engage others, we are far more equipped to encounter, to map, and maybe even begin steps of untangling this web and propose new pathways, ideas, actions, or even conclusions. So, gentlemen, I'd like to close today with a challenge to you as Wabash men who have chosen to undertake their course of study in the liberal arts and sciences. Take opportunities to engage in free speech and protect the rights of others to do the same. Embrace the complicated and robust patterns of speech, of asking questions and adjusting claims, of finding better evidence to support a conclusion, of reevaluating your argument. And also learn to actively practice silence. Find ways to prompt your own reflection from others' ideas. Find ways of creating space and listening with others, new information, ideas, and perspectives. And finally, challenge yourself to synthesize. This process, I warn you, may be uncomfortable. It is far easier to stick to a simplistic line of argument than to acknowledge the ambiguities and complexities. But we are Wabash, and our love for the liberal arts and our call to conduct ourselves at all times on and off campus as responsible gentlemen and citizens, and well, in my case, gentlewomen and citizens, asks us to do more than simple and easy. After all, if you wanted easy, you wouldn't have come to Wabash. Use your experiences with speech and silence to bring together unlikely combinations. Synthesize and create new insights, understandings, and opportunities. Through these principles, I believe together at Wabash, we can find new ways of understanding the problems of the past and of the present. We can create previously undiscovered pathways and innovations for the future and for a better world. I hope that we will all join together in this process. Thank you.